kids, guess what time it is? It's time for some world history learning. Welcome to HipHughes. We're going to be hitting you up with a little bit of history dealing with one of the earliest civilizations that develops in a region of the world called Mesopotamia. And I'm not messing with you. This is perfect if you're in school, maybe you're doing an assignment, maybe you have a test tomorrow, or maybe you're just cray-cray on the internet. Either way, we're going to giddy up for the learning, and we're going to go get her done right now. So as we discussed in the previous lecture on the Neolithic Revolution, kind of the end of the caveman as people begin to sit down and settle and relax and build stuff, we really get different pockets around the world. And one of those earlier pockets is in the Crescent Valley in the Middle East in a land called Mesopotamia. Now, it's not like it's a country. It's not like people are like, hey, I'm from Mesopotamia. Where are you from? Just kind of the area of the world that archaeologists and historians are going to be able to refer to so we know what we're talking about. But a lot of different civilizations and city-states, which we're going to talk about, are going to develop in this area because of geography. Geography is muy importante because really you're dealing in the Middle East with like a lot of sand and it's a hot sun and you can get real thirsty. But luckily there are two rivers, count them, two rivers that flow through this Crescent Valley, and as you can see from the map, it looks like a crescent. We're stretching from the Mediterranean Sea in the west across the Middle East in that crescent shape until you get to the Persian Gulf. And the two rivers that flow southeastward across that desert sand are the Tigris and the Euphrates. Maybe you should write that down. And these two rivers, the land in between it, is pretty groovy, man. Pretty good land that you're going to want to settle on because it is fertile. Once a year, both of these rivers flood, and when the water washes away, it leaves what's called silt, which is very moist, awesome soil that you can grow lots of barley, lots of wheat, fill your granary, fill your belly, and have a good civilization. How about that, kids? So Mesopotamia is a rather large area, and as we move forward, we're really going to be focusing on the Sumerians, which is closer on the eastern side of Mesopotamia, as they're going to build city-states and one of the earliest civilizations. Are you ready to start a civilization? All right, make sure you understand Mesopotamia, which literally means the land between two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. All right, let's see if we can't build a civilization. I'm ready. Are you ready? So we have a winner. We have the first earliest civilization that archaeologists and historians agree is Sumer. And of course the people living in Sumer are Sumerians. Never met a Sumerian, but they did exist. And you have to remember that it took a long time to get to the point where we could have a civilization at the end of the Neolithic Age. The Neolithic Age is 10,000 BCE to around 3,500 BCE. So that's about 6,000 years or so, kind of where people are building small communities and trying to figure things out. But by 3,500 BCE, Sumer is going to be able to check off all 5 boxes. Now, Sumer itself, we'll go through those 5 boxes in a second, I promise, kids. The Sumer itself is about the size of Massachusetts. It was located on the eastern edge of what we call Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq. We're at the Persian Gulf area, right where the Tigris and the Euphrates come together to pour into that Persian Gulf. But they were able to do 5 things that nobody else could do that gives them the title of the earliest civilization. Now, number 1, you need to have advanced cities. And Sumer certainly had numerous cities that were called city-states. They had and Uruk and Umma and Kish and Lagash. Now, these cities shared trade routes. They're going to share languages and technologies and religious customs. But in a sense, they're like separate little, countries all by themselves. They're going to have their own, kings in a sense and rulers and different personalities. They're going to fight with each other. But they are under the umbrella of having these commonalities, things in common that make them all Sumerians. Now, we also are going to need for a civilization, specialized workers. And certainly having city-states and different jobs, you have to build walls and you have to irrigate and raise animals, and there's going to be people that are going to write things down and invent new things. So that box is going to be checked off. Lots of specialized workers in Sumer. You also have complex institutions that develop. That's another requirement. If you're ever building a civilization, you want to have complex institutions. So we're going to have governmental bureaucracies, military bureaucracies, religious bureaucracies, organizations that are going to lay out the rules and how things are done. We're going to have record keeping. Cuneiform is the earliest writing system that was ever developed. And in the beginning, it was more pictorial, like pictures of little cows and such, that develops into an actual written language with even sounds and phonetics and all of that groovy stuff. So they're going to be able to actually have the first recorded history in the world. How about that, kids? And the fifth box, and they're going to be able to check this off, is advanced technologies. Wait till you see all the wonderful things they invent. Sure, some of them are simple, like the wheel. How could you not think of the wheel? I don't know. But they're also going to invent mathematical systems based on 60. Ever wonder why there's 60 seconds in a minute? A circle is 360 degrees. Thank you, Sumerians. So now that we've checked off all 5 boxes, let's take a little bit of a closer look at the people of Sumer. The Sumerians. So now that we know what a civilization is, the next question is why? Why are they going to build a civilization? And I think that the answer really rests in the challenge that the geography presented to the Sumerians. The geography in a sense is wonderful. I mean, they're in Mesopotamia, the land between 2 rivers. Like I could throw stuff down there and grow stuff. But the flooding created a problem. It would leave the silt behind, but then the sun would come and everything would dry up. So the Sumerians are presented with this challenge of how to deal with all of this dry land, but having the flooding. So they're able to figure out that they're able to irrigate. They're able to take the water from the river and move it to where the crops are growing, so they can grow lots and lots of wheat and barley. They love their cereal. But this gave them a surplus of food, which is going to help them deal with the second problem, which is they have a lack of natural resources. I mean, there's not a lot of stuff other than what they're growing in that area. So with this surplus food, they can create trade routes. They can go and get metal to create weapons and tools and new technology. They're able to take that next step. And the third kind of natural geographical thing that's kind of a bummer is that they don't have any natural defenses. And they're able to figure out, with all of this mud silt, they can make little bricks and walls. They built a wall. I kid you not. And this kept them safe. But doing these 3 things requires organization. You need to control workers and give them jobs and have taxes and do all of the things that, are required for a civilization to grow. And that's where you're going to get government and religion and politics and really the fundamental building blocks of civilization. So let's talk about the city-state just for a few minutes here, kids, because it's really, really important. Now, the city-states, in a sense, are like little nations unto themselves that do share some commonalities, but some of those commonalities are really important. Now, because of cultural diffusion, they had trade routes. They bring back this kind of religious idea from outside of Sumer of being polytheistic, of worshiping many gods. And I'm not talking about 3 or 4 gods, I'm talking about like 3,000 gods. But because of the importance of religion and the crops and the weather and this focus on religion, the priest becomes the leader in the beginning of Sumerian life, of the civilization itself. And at the center of every Sumerian city-state is what's called a ziggurat. You want vocab? There's the dumb vocab, ziggurat. Write it down like 10 times. And you can see that this kind of rectangular pyramid kind of structure, which has a temple in the middle, is really going to be, in a sense, like the religious city hall of Sumer life. But as time goes on, and warfare increases, not only between city-states and outside nomadic, tribes, barbarians that are fighting them, but between themselves, city-states fighting city-states, these city-states begin to have standing armies. So it's going to be the strong man that takes the front seat with the priest taking the back seat. And of course, this is where we get the king idea as the strong man passes their power on to their son. So that's the very, very basics of kind of what a city-state was, ziggurat being the most important vocabulary word. And now let's take a look a little bit at their cultural life in Sumer, where the Sumerians live. So we go back to religion really as being culturally the most significant thing in the life of a Sumerian who lived in Sumer. And again, they were polytheistic. They had about 3,000 gods. The number one god was Enlil. And Enlil was the god of the air and the clouds. And you probably could figure out why. Because their crops are life. And if it doesn't rain or the flood doesn't come or the ground dries up, you die. So Enlil was at the top of the food chain in terms of the gods. And the wicked Udugs were the demons and the lowest form of gods that were responsible for bad things that occurred to you. If you got sick or your house burned down or your kid died, it was the wicked Udugs. So people were constantly praying and giving sacrifices and giving gifts to the priests in order to get the gods on their side. They lived for the day. They didn't live for death. This isn't a religion where you die and you go to heaven. You die and you go to like the underworld beneath the earth where it's all dark and nasty. And in fact, they used cuneiform to write their ideas down. That's how we know this. And one of the first pieces of literature in human history was the Epic of Gilgamesh, who was one of the early kings of a city-state in Sumer, where the Sumerians lived. And you can hear from this passage how they viewed life itself. Gilgamesh, whither are you wandering? Life, which you look for, you will never find. For when the gods created man, they let death be his share, and withheld life in their own hands. Immortality, you're not going to find it, Gilgamesh. But we also have a social class that has emerged. It's important who you are when you're born. So, of course, at the top of that pyramid are going to be the leaders, the rulers, the kings, the strong men of society. And then underneath them, a nice cozy life. You could be a priest. How about that? Be a priest. And then we have merchants, the people that sold and traded and were able to accumulate, in a sense, some wealth. And then below them, we have the workers themselves, the people that are digging the ditches, building the walls, carrying the rocks. And then even below them, we have slavery in the land of Sumer. Slaves were normally captured from outside of the kingdom, but they were also sometimes sold by their parents into slavery. But you could free yourselves, I guess, if you worked hard enough, but I certainly wouldn't want to be a slave in any circumstance. Now, there is a slight difference in the way that men and women were viewed in Sumer that they're going to be viewed afterwards. It certainly is a patriarchal society. In a sense, it's run by men. That's what patriarchy means. It's run by men. But unlike civilizations that occur afterwards, women could basically have any job. They could be priests, they could be merchants, they could be artisans. They couldn't learn to write. That was one negative of being a woman, but they could own property, which is unheard of after that. Maybe the Sumers were a little more advanced than the civilizations that are going to occur after them. And finally, I'd like to talk about science and technology. So they invented lots and lots of things. Not only do they invent some pretty simple stuff like the wheel, invented the wheel, but they're going to be the first ones really to invent sails for, navigational purposes. They're the first ones that recorded maps. They invent plows. They're the first ones to use bronze. Of course, they had writing systems. Again, that's the word cuneiform. Write down that 10 times. They're the first ones to investigate astronomy and medicine and chemistry. And because of the ziggurats, architecture becomes really important. And you need ramps, and you need arches, and you need columns, which means you need, brace yourselves, kids, you need math. So they come up with a mathematical system that was based on 60. That's why we have 60 seconds. That's why there's 360 degrees in a circle. So I'm going to give a shout out to the Sumerians. Thank you for having the first civilization, but like all great peoples, you're going to be invaded and conquered by somebody a little bit stronger. So let's look at some of the other civilizations that are going to pop up in kind of that area of Sumer and in Mesopotamia in general, and then we'll close up shop and your brain will be a lot bigger. How about that? Bigger brains. Nothing lasts forever. Now, the Sumerians themselves had a really good run at it. Remember, they start around 3500 BCE, and about 1,000 years later, a little more than 1,000 years, although they were on the fighting downfall for a while, they're finally going to be overtaken by the Akkadians. Akkad was a city-state that was north of where Sumer was, and their leader was the Sargon of Akkad. And Sargon of Akkad is going to have the distinct pleasure of being the first leader of an empire. Not just a city-state, not just a civilization, but an empire, a real empire. So around 2350 BCE, they're going to invade, they're going to adopt to the Sumerians a lot of their customs and their beliefs, but they're going to be the top dogs running the show. And their empire, that means that it's not just going to be Sumer, but it's going to be expanding northward and westward as well. And eventually that's going to stretch from the Mediterranean, you could see from the map right there, all the way through Iran. So that's a pretty big empire that they had. It lasted for about 200 years. Again, these were the Akkadians under the Sargon of Akkad who invaded Sumer and the Sumerians and created the first empire. Good for him. But eventually those folks are going to be replaced around 2000 BCE by the Amorites. And the Amorites are going to overrun the Sumerians. They were a numeric kind of barbaric tribe that came in and are going to run the show now. And they're going to make their capital at Babylon. And that's why they're known as Babylonians. And the Babylonians are going to last for about 500 years to about 1500 BCE. But their crowning achievement, their golden age, around 1750 BCE, is going to be when they had the leader Hammurabi. And Hammurabi is best known for not only being a very powerful and, in a sense, peaceful leader. He really tried to look after his people, but he believes in law and order. So here's some more vocabulary. It's called Hammurabi's Code. And we have a video that you can go check out. We've already made if you want to learn more about Hammurabi's Code. It's linked down in the description below. But it's going to be a set of 282 laws that were etched in stone and put across all of the empire, so everybody had a standardized book of rules to follow. And in a sense, it's an eye for an eye. It's very gangster in a sense. You can hear a couple of them really quickly right now. If a man has stolen an ox, a sheep, a pig, or a boat that belongs to a temple or palace, he shall repay 30 times its cost. If it is a private citizen, he shall repay 10 times. If the thief cannot pay, he shall be put to death. If a woman hates her husband and says to him, "You cannot be with me," the authorities in her district will investigate the case. If she has been chastened without fault, even though her husband has neglected or belittled her, she will be held innocent and may return to her father's house. If the woman is at fault, she shall be thrown in the river. I told you, it's pretty gangster, and that's Hammurabi's Code. But eventually, everything comes to an end. Even the Babylonians couldn't stay in power with all their nifty rules and such, and around 1500 BCE, they're going to be kicked out of town as well. All right, guys, we hope that you understand the very basics of Mesopotamia. Remember, this is an intro lecture. You're probably going to have to learn a little bit more by maybe, I don't know, reading a book or something. But we certainly hope that you have enough to make yourself comfortable in class, pass that test, and maybe your brain's a little bit bigger as well. So giddy up the learning one more time, guys. I say it at the end of every lecture because I mean it with all my heart. Where attention goes, energy flows. Make sure you check out the Growing World playlist down in the description below. And if you haven't checked out the homepage, we have over 400 videos across the social studies. We certainly hope that you check that out. I'm not even from Canada, and I say out. All right, guys, we'll see you next time that you press my buttons.